It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with the Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the Commander in front of us on my quest out brew the Magic World. And as always, the deck list will be down in the description for you below. Today we are working on finishing up our celebration of Ravnica Remastered, making a deck for every guild on Ravnica, and I thought, why not end our Ravnica fun with my two favorite guilds for today and tomorrow. Today we're looking at the Simic Combine, and there's a lot of really fun Simic commanders. A couple of them are pretty fun on Ravnica. I'd really thought about something like Prime Speaker Vannifar and doing like the pod thing. But I thought, why not come back to someone like Zegana? We just talked about a +1/+1 counter deck with Merfolk in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, so I didn't want to go Merfolk tribal. I really wanted to just go +1/+1 counters tribal and kind of ++1 counters and just try to have some fun and really try to build a deck that cares about +1/+1 counters. Let's read Zegana, and then we'll talk about how we're going to try to do this. Zegana Utopian Speaker is a 4-mana 4/4 Merfolk wizard. It says when it enters the battlefield, if we control another creature with a counter on it, +1/+1 counter, we draw a card. For 6 mana, we can put 4 +1/+1 counters on Zegana as long as she doesn't have a counter on her already. And it says each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. And that's a key line of text because the bigger we grow our creatures, of course, the easier they're going to be to trump block, right? So we want to utilize these abilities to help us stick our creatures through. And we're going to talk about it in a little bit because we have a couple other creatures that do something very similar that say each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has blank. We'll talk about those towards the end when we talk about how we're going to finish out the game. But first, let's talk about +1/+1 counters. There's a couple ways to get +1/+1 counters on our creatures, but the first thing we're going to talk about is playing Hydras or creatures where you could have them come down with a certain amount of counters on them. This is a great way to get a big creature if we have a ton of mana, or otherwise just get something with a +1/+1 counter on it. We're also playing a one-off Tyrant Guard from 40k decks because it gets counters on it with it being an X-Spell, kind of like a Hydra, but it has the ability to sacrifice to give all of our creatures with counters on them hexproof and indestructible. We have some creatures that'll give a counter to everything. We have Defiler of Vigor, giving a counter to each creature we control whenever we cast a green permanent. We have Forgotten Ancient that gets counters on it when our opponents play spells, and then it can actually move any number of those counters around to other creatures at the start of our turn. And this is key because we can use things like Gyre Sage, Incubation Druid, and Kami of Whispered Ones to get those counters on to help them tap for more mana. We have Loyal Guardian at the start of our combat. If we control our commander, we put a +1/+1 counter on every creature we control, and that's pretty cool. Master Biomancer will actually put counters on things as they come in, where the +1/+1 counters are equal to its power, which is pretty darn cool. Rishkar Pima's Renegade puts 2 on creatures when it comes in, and then gives all those creatures with a counter on it the ability to tap for green mana. So as you can see, we have some creatures that are going to be able to spread counters out, but we also have things like Give and Take, which can put counters on creatures or take them off to draw cards, as well as Silk Guard, which can put counters on things and then protect things as well. We also have things like the Great Henge, which is going to, put counters on things when they come in, and then we have something like Simic Ascendancy for 3 mana, which can put a counter onto our creature, and we'll talk about Simic Ascendancy in a little bit when we talk about win cons. And then we have Tribute to the World Tree. If a creature comes in with power 3 or less, we put 2 counters on it. Otherwise, we draw a card, and that can help for our smaller creatures coming in, getting counters on them. Okay, so there's just some ways we could put +1/+1 counters on creatures. There's a few more, but I think those are the main big ones. How do we get more? How do we get more counters on our creatures? Well, I think there's 2 ways to do this. We have a few creatures in our deck that have Evolve or have effects that add more onto them. Tyranid Prime gives all of our creatures Evolve, so if a creature with a bigger power or toughness comes in, it gets a counter. We have things like Lorescare, Quaddle, and Managorger Hydra that are going to get a +1/+1 counter every time something happens. The Managorger Hydra is every time our opponent casts a spell, whereas the Quaddle gets one every time we draw a card, so that's just a way that those can increase. But I think one of the big ones is proliferating. Once all of our creatures have counters on them, we can happily proliferate more counters on them. Flux Channeler and Evolution Sage both can proliferate us. Flux Channeler whenever we cast an on-creature spell, and Evolution Sage whenever we play a land, which is going to be pretty easy in a deck like ours. Azuri Stalker Spheres can proliferate when it comes in. Otherwise, it'll draw us a card every time we proliferate, which is important if we have certain of these creatures out that are proliferating onto our creatures. Roalesque, when it dies, proliferates a couple times, and it's not a bad body in itself. And we have things like Renegade Crisis that has evolved. Whenever it evolves, we put counters on other things that already have counters on them. Same thing when you do have a couple spells that proliferate, Contentious Plan, Tezzeret's Gambit, Experimental Augury. These are spells that do other things, but they also proliferate at the same time, again, putting more counters on that. And then we have a cool spell in Ripples of Potential that can proliferate and then phase out our permanents or creatures to protect them in the case of a board wipe and things like that. We do have other protection spells, but the Ripples of Potential will actually proliferate as well as protect them, which I think is important. We do have some cards that just play really well with this that we haven't had a chance to use on the channel before. Tanazir Quandrix says when it comes in, we can double the number of +1/+1 counters on a target creature we control, but every time it attacks, we can have the base power and toughness of all other creatures we control with counters on them, or all other creatures we control become Tanazir's power and toughness on the turn. This is kind of a fun ability because we can make their base power and toughness its current power and toughness, so the more counters it has, the bigger those creatures become. Of course, we're using things like Champion of Lambhole to help us end the game, making our things unblockable. And then we get to play a card I've been wanting to use for a long time, and it feels perfect in a deck like this, being that it's from Ravnica in Biogenic Ooze. Creature that when it comes in, we make a token. At the beginning of each of our end steps, we put a counter on each ooze we control, and we can make more tokens with it. This card just feels Simic to me, and I love it, and I love getting to play it in a deck like this. But the ways we can help end the game, other than Zegana giving all of our creatures trample, Skatewing Spy will actually give all of our creatures with a +1/+1 counter on it flying, and Herald of the Secret Streams will give all of our creatures with a +1/+1 counters on them the ability to not be blocked. And these are the type of effects that are going to help us push through for big damage and make sure that we're working towards the end of the game, whereas we don't always need the trample from Zegana, although the trample right will still help. Flying doesn't completely win us the game. There are still decks that can fly. Of course, unblockability can go a long way to help us out with that as well. And I think that's important because we need some way to finish the game. We have things like Wave Goodbye, which can return each creature without a +1/+1 counter on it to their owner's hands. This could potentially completely wipe a board for us and get us ready to go to take a big attack that way, which is pretty important. And then we have Simic Ascendancy, which says every time we put a +1/+1 counter on a creature we control, we put a growth counter on it. And then at the beginning of our upkeep, if it has 20 or more growth counters on it, we win the game. So this is just another way to start kind of amassing a second win con if we can't win via combat to hurt our opponents. We have Branching Evolution and Hardened Scales, which will both affect the amount of counters that are put on something, and then we do have Inexorable Tide to, again, really keep going on that proliferate engine to satisfy that side of the deck. Again, this deck's pretty straightforward. Get +1/+1 counters on things, get more +1/+1 counters on things, and try to attack in to win the game that way. There's a lot of fun cards in the deck in the creature slots, a lot of fun spells. And I love getting able to play, that new Guardian Project, Great Henge, the Ozolith to protect our counters, Simic Ascendancy, a lot of just great cards that are going to push us forward in-game to find our win con. Well, let's get into our, a play test. We have a 3-lander here, which I think looks good. Zegana's 4, and I mean, we have a good chance of drawing some more. Turn 1, we draw Experimental Augury, so look at the top 3, put 1 into your hand and the rest on the bottom, and then proliferate. Worst case scenario, this is something we could do early to try to find another land. So we're just going to play that Snarl. I don't think we really need to show a land, but we could if we wanted to. There's really no reason for it to be untapped because there's nothing we can do with it. Turn 2 here, we could a natural restoration, but we have nothing in our graveyard, so we can't do that. We could also Augury as well. Or we could just wait a turn and see what we draw. This is an instant, so we could always do it on our opponent's turn if we want to. So let's just say we wait till our opponents before our turns. End step, Rogue's Passage, Scavenging Ooze, and a Forest. 1 into our hand, the rest on the bottom. Well, the Forest or the Rogue's Passage, we get us up to the 4 mana for Zegana. Scavenging Ooze is a good creature. I like the Rogue's Passage because eventually if we get enough mana, we can start making things unblockable. So we'll put that in our hand. We'll put this on the bottom. Put this on the bottom, and then I guess, you know, again, nothing to proliferate. But now we have the passage in our hand. We draw a Forest, which is pretty great. That allows us to get another land down, which is great. Bread for the Hunt doesn't feel like a bad play this turn, setting us up for future turns where our creatures start attacking, so I think I do that. Crisis isn't always a bad play, but I always want to try to make X as big as I can, since we have a better chance of drawing more cards with it that way. Turn 4, we get another land down. We're 1 mana off of Rolesque. So there's an option, do we Zegana, but we won't get the draw if it comes in. I think I just like the Guardian Project here, get ourselves ready for next turn. Oran Reef, the Vastwood's a pretty cool land that can put counters on every creature comes in that turn. That's important. I think I just like dumping Rolesque down here. When it enters a battlefield, we put 2 counters on the target. Oh, actually, now that I think about it. Do we tide? Well, we don't have counters on anything. I guess we could Crisis for 3. That would end up drawing us 1 and gaining 1 life. That doesn't feel like a bad idea, putting that down for 3. We get 1 off the project and 1 off of Hydroid Crisis and gain a life that way. That fills up our hand with another creature, which is great, and then the Rolesque. So we'll go to the next turn here. I don't think we need the 6th land at the moment, so I think I'd just play Loyal Guardian. Draw off the Guardian Project. We can take an attack here with the Crisis if need be. Now we have a counter on a creature, so we can get Zegana down and draw a card off of it. 6 mana, we would have a 5 mana Great Henge if we want to do that. 7 lands. I forgot an inch down. So do that for 5, then we'd have enough mana for that. So let's do that and then get Zegana down. Zegana would actually come in with a counter, but we'd still draw a card off the project and draw a card off of Zegana coming in on the Great Henge, and then has a counter on itself at the start of our combat. Guardian puts 1 on everything. Now we've got ourselves moving. Bread for the Hunt could be drawing us cards here if we were attacking with, you know, Crisis in the air. We'll go 1 more turn. Path of Ancestry in tapped. I like the idea of getting the Ancient down. I like the idea of getting Rolesque down. I feel like Rolesque isn't a bad idea. We would draw 2, 1 off the project, 1 off of the Henge. That's 5 mana. We'd have 1, 2, 3, 4 left. So we could get down to Zuri, get down, I think Forgotten Ancient feels right here. Again, 1 off of the Guardian Project, 1 off of Henge. We're going to end up having to pitch here, but that's okay. We've now got a great state. Rolesque comes in and puts a counter on something else. Probably Crisis here because it's the one that has the least counters on it or the least power, and it's in the air, so it's pretty big. And then we would just move to end step here. I would keep the Silk Guard. I don't think we had mana up, but even if we did, it's a good way to just protect our board, since a lot of our creatures now have +1/+1. All of our creatures now have +1/+1 counters on them. Still ain't in hand. I guess pitch the give and take because we have enough card draw at this point between the project and the Henge. And then this turn, the Skatewing Spy would get all of our creatures into the air, which would potentially be a way to get in for game. That way, the Tyrant Guard feels good here also to give ourselves Hexproof Indestructible. The Hardened Scales wouldn't be a bad idea to start getting us more counters, and I think I would, let's see, 4 for the Spy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we would put 3 into the X here, and then the Skatewing Spy, we would end up drawing, what, 4? And now everything's in the air, everything has counters on them, and this is the point where we can hopefully translate this into a big attack for a game. But let me know, what do you guys think of Zegana counters down in the comment section below. This is a deck that I enjoyed building. It's cool to see a +1/+1 counters deck not be in Merfolk like Hackball was, a deck that I really enjoy, and getting to play just some fun creatures I wouldn't play otherwise. Of course, I love my Tyranids from the deck that I have there. Love seeing some of the Hydras in the deck and things like that. But let me know what you think, and I will catch you guys next time.